Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Women of FHSS. Today, joining me, we have Kari Rasmussen. Kari, welcome.
Thank you for having me. It's good to be here.
Thank you so much for your time. I met Kari during another interview that we had for our geography students, and I'm so excited to have her back. So, Kari, I was wondering if we could start off by you telling us a little bit about yourself.
Oh, sure. So my name's Kari Rasmussen. I grew up in Arizona and quickly after graduation went to BYU summer term and started at BYU. And I'm sure I'll get more into kind of that journey a little bit later on. But I did major in geography with environmental studies, and I went on to do outdoor and environmental education and kind of built upon that foundation. And I live in Utah currently. I have been traveling around the last 12 years or so, in and out of Alaska and California. But I'm currently in Utah, closer to family, and I'm loving it. And yeah, do you want to know anything else specific?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I wrote a bio for you a while ago just for fun, just to see where you've been. Can you tell us all the work that you've done since you graduated and different companies that you've worked with?
Absolutely. And it's interesting because my career really started while I was still at BYU. Um, I didn't wait long. Like I said, I went to summer term my freshman year. I went to fall term or semester, and then I called my parents. It was very late at night, I remember, and I just said, I'm coming home at Christmas and I'm not going back to BYU. And the reason being is I always just had this feeling of, wow, the world is so big. There's so much to do out there. And BYU, I not that I didn't enjoy it, I just felt like there's so much to do. Like I'm kind of free in a sense to go do what I want to do. And I was in the halls at BYU and saw a flyer for the Student Conservation Association, and it just had a lot of internships. I knew I was interested in the outdoors. I had been declared like a pre-zoology major, and so I was taking zoology classes and chemistry and math and all these classes that were in these big auditorium style seating, which uh, was really overwhelming for me. And on top of having these feelings of like, what am I doing? I could be anywhere right now. So I actually applied to quite a few internships with the Student Conservation Association as a freshman, and ended up choosing the San Francisco Bay National Wildlife Refuge to go do an internship there doing education. So I had worked in education in high school, just kind of after school jobs. And I knew I liked teaching. And so I worked up at the San Francisco Bay National Wildlife Refuge for 4 months. It was just an internship, and I was doing education with teachers, training teachers how to bring their students on field trips and doing science experiments with them out on the salt marsh. And I asked my advisor, or she worked for Fish and Wildlife Service, what she majored in, and she said environmental studies. And I happened to go back. I didn't know if I was going to go back to BYU, but I went and I looked on the website, and BYU had an environmental studies major in the geography department. And I thought, okay, I'll go back and I'll do that. And it worked out great because throughout college, I was now in much smaller classes, which worked well for me. The geography department and then environmental studies kind of whittled down even smaller. So really probably up to 10, 12 people in some of my classes. And I was more successful that way. It was a good thing to learn about myself. I knew if the professors knew my name, then I would go to class and I would want to learn, and I would just be more engaged. So I think it's important to find your place at BYU. And for me, that was the geography department. And it included going on geography department campouts, or I guess geography club campouts. And that's where I met some of my best friends that I still keep in contact with today. And so that was really the foundation. I kind of knew that there was this world of environmental education out there. And now I had a major, and I continued to look for opportunities while at school. So, for example, I was at Sundance one day and they just had a sign that said environmental office. And I thought, well, I'm doing environmental studies. I wonder what that is. And I went to them and I said, hey, I'm a geography student. I just finished an internship. Do you do any education? And they actually came back to me and said, actually, we are opening a nature center and we're looking for someone to run it. And so I helped run. There was a director of the nature center and then me, and we ran this center. So I worked full time. I used that as one of my internship credits. I think I got 6 credits for working full time for them. I definitely went slower through school because I kept taking semesters off to work. So I went on a mission as well. So that I think it took me 7 years before I actually graduated. So I worked for the Sundance Nature Center. I was guiding hikes and doing summer camps in the summer. And during the winter, I was doing special programming. They have holiday programming and snowshoe hikes and things like that. So I did that, and I met an ecologist that we would have as a guest speaker, and he ended up becoming the education director at Tracy Aviary. So my last semester of BYU, I actually moved up to Salt Lake and worked at Tracy Aviary for full time, and it was great. I always kind of knew what I was going to do, and school almost seemed like this thing that I just had to get done because you have to have a degree, but I was already working in my field, right? And I had to seek out those opportunities while I was in school. And I was very proactive in reaching out to people and saying, hey, this is what I want to do. Are there any opportunities? And then as I was going through school, I had kind of these 2 things solidify for me. One was I had always wanted to work in Alaska, and the other was I had always wanted to work on a boat. So I knew that, I know they're just kind of funny, but that's what I wanted to do. And, nothing was really holding me in Utah. And so when I graduated, I left Tracy Aviary and I moved up to Alaska, and I worked in the Arctic, and I worked in the visitor center at Gates of the Arctic National Park. So I was there for 6 months and got to experience the Arctic. And I thought, oh, that was great. That was a great adventure. I'll probably never come back to Alaska again. But little did I know I have a whole future that I spent in Alaska. So I did that. And then afterwards, I went and I moved to Long Beach, California, and I worked and lived on a sailboat where we took kids out to Catalina Island, and we taught marine science. We went kayaking and snorkeling, and it was a really great experience. I kind of thought, oh, I did all the things I wanted to do. I was 26 at the time when I was kind of done working on the boat, and I just had done everything I thought I wanted to do. And I was like, okay, well, what do I do next? So I continued on in California doing different environmental ed jobs, kind of working my way up through the system, becoming a manager and director of education and at different places. I worked at the LA Zoo. I worked doing education for the Los Angeles River. So I was in and out of environmental ed throughout Southern California, and I ended up getting an opportunity. It was interesting. I was working at Loyola Marymount University in Los Angeles, and I had been kind of I was paid by a nonprofit, but I worked at the university. The nonprofit was based in Boston, and we were teaching teachers how to use their outdoor classroom space as science labs and how to find green space in LA and utilize it. And the nonprofit actually went under. They called me one day and said, hey, we don't have any more money. We haven't been applying for grants and we're going to close our doors. And it was an interesting transition because I had wanted to go back to Alaska after being 5 years in Los Angeles. And it was kind of that opportunity that the Lord gives you of like, here's a decision point. What are you going to do? And the university offered to hire me directly instead of through the nonprofit. But as I had this discussion that things were closing, I started looking into Alaska more. And the University of Alaska was hiring for a K-12 curriculum developer for climate change studies or curriculum that they were doing throughout different villages in Alaska. And I had one phone interview with the University of Alaska, and suddenly I was getting offered a job and moving back up to Alaska. So it's been interesting to kind of watch the progression of my life now. Back then, I was very, very much just kind of always having the thought of like, well, if I go work on a boat, how am I going to go to church? Am I going to be able to date? But always kind of feeling like, well, that decision doesn't feel bad to go work on a boat. I've always wanted to do it. And then doing that. So it was always kind of just spirit guided, but also kind of making my own decisions like, well, this is what I want to do. I also would like to date and I would like to get married. I would like all these things that you kind of think of, especially as a BYU student, right? But none of that was really happening very naturally at the time. So I just kept going. I just kept doing what I felt like I wanted to do, and the opportunities were being presented to me, and so I just kept going. So I have worked in a variety of spaces, in a variety of different climates and places and regions, and I spent a lot of time traveling around rural Alaska and visiting villages, and I lived remote in Alaska as well. So I feel like every decision that I was making, you know, I was just going further and further to the edge of the world. And I always had to ask, like, is this a good place to be for me? And for me, it always was a good place. You know, I feel like the opportunities were there and the Spirit said, yep, that's fine. And I said, okay, well, I would like to do that. So I'm going to. So yeah, that was a long answer for the different places I've been, some of the work that I've done. And it's always been, what are my interests? What opportunities are being presented to me? What am I maintaining righteous desires in my heart for what I want for my life? And just kind of making educated guesses. There are some experiences I have where I definitely felt like that's where the Lord wants me. But for the most part, and I know that you'll probably want to talk about this a little bit later, for the most part, I have felt like the Lord isn't so concerned with where I am or what I'm doing, as long as I feel like I'm still working towards these righteous goals and desires that I have. And He will bless the path. So I'm happy to talk about that a little more too. But I'll let you.
Yeah, I'm just sitting here totally into what you're saying. You're also a really good storyteller. I don't know if anyone's ever shared that with you before, but I really appreciate your authenticity about, I had all these opportunities in front of me because I was proactive. I felt that experience, and even though it may seem like you took longer in your education, it was exactly the time that you needed in order to qualify yourself and maybe have some of these opportunities. I work with a lot of students that think that college has to look a certain way, that you have to graduate by a certain time, that you have to have certain milestones of your life checked off before you leave. And it's just refreshing to hear look at how successful you've been and the things that you've been able to achieve and the things that you've wanted to do, and keeping in mind, that you have righteous desires and that you've had the Lord included in all these decisions along this journey of, by the way, agency, which is why we're here in the first place, right? You have the opportunity to make all these choices. And so I guess some things that I just jotted down while you were talking was that you started all of this by asking questions.
Mhm.
And so I'm sure that as you had these different opportunities that you have been involved with, there were different things that you had to grapple with personally and professionally at each stage in your life and in your career. So I was wondering if we could maybe talk a little bit about that. What are some things that you've had to grapple with personally and professionally along this journey?
Well, I think you hit one of the key things is just starting to look at life that there's there's no one path. Um, I think that I felt like it was a big leap for me to call my parents and say, I'm not going to stay my second semester of my freshman year, because that's not typically how it goes, right? And to me, it's like I was practicing this skill of saying, this is how I see the trajectory of life going for many people, but I feel like for my life, I want to go a different direction. And it's almost like a practiced skill to make those decisions, because I had no idea what was going to happen. I had no idea what my parents were going to say. And I'm kind of a person, I didn't really give my parents a chance to counsel with me on the decision. I kind of just said, I'm coming home. and and that was really internally me kind of testing the waters of life, right? Testing the waters of, I can do something different. Let's see what happens. And it became kind of a an a, I mean, it's not a game, it wasn't a thrill, but it was thrilling to see life work out as I made decisions that, if I were following the typical trajectory of maybe like the thought process of supposed to be's, then um, I probably wouldn't have made those decisions,
Tell me
right?
about that. What do you mean by supposed to be?
I think culturally we have supposed to be's, right? I think if we're looking at it from like a doctrinal sense, or just even taking religion out of it, just a kind of a lens of your life and where it's going, I think we have supposed to be's. Um, I mean, there's the typical stereotypes of, you go to BYU and you date a lot and you get married, and that's just like not the reality for so many people. And it wasn't the reality for me. I had a great social life at BYU, but I really wasn't much of a dater. And I really, I guess I had never thought, I never felt the pressure of like, you have to be married. Or at least I didn't put that pressure on me. I think there are external pressures that you feel, just by nature of all of the dating and love you see going on around you, right? And so I think that's definitely something that in my mind could be a supposed to be, or the supposed to be that you turn 21 and you decide to go on a mission, or not go on a mission. And I turned 21 and I decided not to go on a mission. I was kind of like, I went out with sister missionaries and I thought, this is like visiting teaching. I can do this at home. um, and I ended up going when I was 23, and it was the right time for me. It was the right thing for me. It was, again, I say that these things were the right time, they were the right thing, but in all honesty, I chose to do them, and they were just things that I wanted to do. So when I was 23, suddenly I was like, I think I do want to go on a mission. And so I did. And I think sometimes we get caught up in, what does the Lord want me to do? When I often think it's very rare that he has something very specific that he wants you to do. I think it's more common that you have an interest or a desire and you go to the Lord and say, I'd like to do this, and then opportunities are presented to you, or you have the guts to reach out and create opportunities, right? So I think all throughout my early 20s, I'm always kind of grappling with, what am I supposed to do? But I have like all these wants that I think this would be cool to do, or I want that experience. And you just kind of have to come to terms with, are you going to live your life because of the supposed to be's, because of the way you see other people living your life, or are you going to counsel with, I think it is counseling with the Lord and saying, I have these desires, I want to do these things, I want to go work on a boat. Like, who does that? So can I, like, should I? And conversing and counseling with the Lord throughout those decisions, that's the biggest thing. And it comes through faith. It comes through, do I really trust that God is this loving God who wants me to be happy? And it comes through trusting that your path may not be getting married right away, and that may not be the happiness that you need right then. And your path is just your counseling with the Lord and your interests, and who do you want to become? What experiences can allow you to become that person? Who do you think the Lord wants you to become? And having those all kind of intertwined to create a life for yourself. And that is not something that I feel is like I'm done grappling by any means. I said this before because I really believe it. It's these skills that you're almost practicing. You're almost kind of experimenting with life, right? What's going to happen if I do this? I don't feel bad about it. I feel like it's a good way to go. So what's going to happen? And as time has gone forward and I've made some pretty bold decisions and bold moves, I've realized life works out. And there are certainly times when things haven't worked out. And in the whole big picture, what I can see from this moment, it actually is working out, right? And there's failure is fine. Success is fine. You're going to have both. So why not just enjoy the enjoy the opportunities that come and learn from the opportunities that don't really work out.
I love that. So many things for us to glean from. I think that it's really valuable for students listening to this to understand that we talk a lot with other women in this initiative about the box, right? And that we paint ourselves into this box. And we have a lot of women saying, shatter the box. It doesn't have to look a certain way. And that's okay. You can get outside of this box guilt-free. And I think it's so much easier said than done, but I really appreciate that you, along this journey, have been able to say, okay, I need to make sure that I'm looking at this from this perspective. Maybe in the minute that you're making that decision, it doesn't feel that way, but that you were able to foundationally find things that allowed you to trust yourself, trust the Lord and the decisions that you were making, and that you were able to progress and have these really incredible experiences along the way. And also do it in a way, to me, it sounds like you did this in a very guilt-free way because you had that relationship with Heavenly Father and with Jesus Christ, and that you were able to rely on that relationship to know that the things that you were doing were exactly what you needed to do in order to learn what you needed to learn and be the person that you needed to be.
Yeah, and I think that's key. It's we've heard it before through various talks and whatnot. Becoming, it's not doing. I mean, we do things to become, and I think the Lord blesses us to become as we counsel with Him, and I think He's very creative. And if you want to be creative, I think He's going to allow for that. So you're right. We don't want to put ourselves in a box and think that life has to be that box. When you're starting out at BYU, I don't know that you see much more than the box. At least I don't know that I did. And I think that's why I had to make such a bold decision so early on at BYU, to leave and to say, I might not come back. So yeah, I love hearing that you're speaking with other students, especially women, about what their path can look like, because it really can look like anything. And there is a story that I wanted to share. I was thinking about this morning as I was looking over some of the questions that I knew we were going to go over. And one of them is about my faith and how my faith has played an active role in these decisions. So when I first moved to San Francisco, I was 19, and I was living in a house on the salt marsh. It was actually a trailer on the salt marsh with different biologists and interns that were much older than me, most of them in their mid-20s. And none of them LDS by any means. So I was pretty young, and I had put myself in this unique situation. And I think for me, it was an essential decision point as far as who am I going to be in the gospel? What do I believe? And how am I going to move forward in life? And I love the ocean. So I will just tell you that since I was a kid, I just loved the ocean. And I always wanted to go live by the ocean. And I grew up in Arizona. I was going to school in Utah. And I was finally at the ocean, right? My roommates, I got there on a Saturday. So I didn't know any of these 5 people in my house. All I remember is that night they had gotten home from a Chemical Brothers concert, and they asked me, they said, hey, tomorrow, which was a Sunday, tomorrow we're going to go to Santa Cruz and we're going to go to the beach. So that, to me, I was like, oh, I love the beach. I love the ocean. And I had a thought come to me. I remember going in my room. That was Saturday night. It was late. Sunday morning, I woke up and they were getting ready to go to the beach. And they said, are you going to come? And I remember going back into my room, and it was nice because I think I was the only person that had my own room at that point. So I was able to just kneel in prayer and say, I love the beach. I love the ocean. You know that about me. What do I do? And I had looked up where the church was. It was about a 3.5 mile walk for me to church. But I knew if I could get to church, if I chose to go to church, then someone would take me home. Like it would just be that one way, right? So I actually had this thought come to me while I was praying, and it was when I was really little. I was probably 4 or 5, and my mom was in a bowling league, and I had to go to the bowling league daycare. And I remember I just did not enjoy bowling league daycare. And it was in the mall, and I just remember I just didn't like going there. And my mom was holding my hand. We were walking out of the daycare, and she said to me, "Kari, we don't have to go to bowling daycare anymore. Bowling is over." And for some reason, it's very clear in my mind, and maybe it's because I was equating this with like being in nursery or sunbeams or whatever I was in at church, because in my mind I made this connection like, oh, if this ends, like when does church end? And I remember asking my mom, I said, when does church end? And she said, oh, Kari, church never ends. We always go to church. Okay. That's a normal thing for a mom to say to a 4-year-old. It's like, we always go to church. But when I was 19 and I was making this decision on my own, living potentially a very different life than I had been up to that point, as I was kneeling, that story came to mind, and I just heard the words, Kari, we always go to church. And so it was, again, one of those experiments where I had that thought, and then you experiment like, okay, let's see what that means. And so I went out to the front room, and I asked these girls, I said, actually, I'm not going to go to Santa Cruz, but on your way out, do you mind dropping me off at church? And I did get some weird looks. Okay, whatever you want. So they did. They dropped me off at church, and I had never gone to church alone like that in a strange place, in a new place. And immediately someone came up to me in the foyer and started talking to me, and it all worked out. I had chosen, I was able to get rides to church every week, and met some great families that kind of took care of me. And I did get to go to the beach eventually. So that really was one of the big decision points in my life, is, am I going to continue to go to church, right? And that process has evolved over time. Certainly as I got older, and being single and older, and then kind of living out in the middle of nowhere, you always are kind of like asking yourself this question, like, oh, is this worth it? Like, sometimes it's painful, sometimes it's fun, sometimes, there's all these different emotions that go on throughout the years. But if I hadn't made that decision, I wouldn't have known how well it worked out, how much the Lord, when you put him first, takes care of you. And I can always look back on that as things got more difficult in the future, just as this successful experiment of, okay, I'm gonna go to church, and I think that comes back to, I decided to believe Christ in what he says, and it's sometimes I decide not to believe him. Where that's what life is, right? A series of choices of, do we trust God enough to live what he tells us is the best way. So I think that those decisions, those one by one decisions of experimentation upon what is the Lord's real promise to me, and does he fulfill his promises? And you don't get that assurance until you make those types of decisions that are going to test it, right? So that set the tone, I think, for all the other times when I was moving and just didn't have to make the decision to continue in my faith. So I just wanted to share that.
Yeah, thank you. I'm so grateful for that story, because I feel like that story emulated how you approach decision making in the future, right? You're always doing this hand in hand with this, with Heavenly Father, who was there for you during the first decisions that you had to make about the things that were important and what you needed to prioritize in your life. I feel like we have a lot of women students who are seeking similar answers, who are grappling with, how do I make these decisions? What does that look like? And so hearing your story, I'm hoping will reinvigorate how they are making decisions. And the fact that it looked differently is part of that experimentation, is part of the trusting yourself, trusting the Lord, seeing what that relationship looks like to move forward in some of these things that are outside of the box. And I also appreciate that you said you think that a lot of people probably come in the box, and that stages of maturity and stages of kind of these experimentations is what helped you see that life could look differently, and that was okay, and that helped prepare you to be your best self and to become, and that you're still becoming. So I love that you shared that story, Kari. I think that's going to resonate. It resonated very distinctly with me. I'm hoping it resonates with people who are listening in today.
Oh, good. Yeah, I think those decisions, some of them are turning point decisions, and others are just these decisions that we kind of put in this receptacle that make us who we are, and also allow us to draw upon them when we need them. And I'll be
Absolutely.
forever grateful to my mom who said that to me, who probably was just like, oh, my 4 or 5-year-old is, I gotta tell her, like, church, we always go to church, I don't think she was thinking, I'm gonna teach my daughter this deep doctrinal truth by any means. It's probably just the first thing that came out of her mouth. But bless her for being receptive to those types of answers, because it blessed my life. It probably did change the trajectory of my life.
That's awesome. And so for all of our future moms who are listening, sometimes you wonder if your kids are listening to you, and they are. They're current moms.
Yeah.
So we've talked a lot about decision making and your faith and the different things that you've had to grapple with personally and professionally at each stage of your career. I was curious if you could tell us a little bit about, were there specific things that helped open up future opportunities for you that you didn't know necessarily would open up future opportunities? What would you suggest for students who are kind of in the middle of these decisions, about any advice that you have for them?
Well, I definitely created relationships with people along the way. Like I had mentioned this ecologist that we worked with at Sundance, who ended up hiring me at Tracy Aviary. And it was because I felt like, oh, I've worked with him a little bit. I could probably reach out to him. And, I had to apply to the job and everything. But that worked out. And it's funny because I didn't even stay at Tracy Aviary for very long. And I don't think he was happy about that. But as I was living in Salt Lake, I had a friend who was going to Alaska, and that's like what piqued my interest in it. And I ended up thinking, well, I want to go to Alaska too. And if I'm going to do it, I better do it now in life. So, and me going to Alaska the first time allowed me to go the second time because I had that experience in remote parts of Alaska. And I'll tell you kind of the train of that for me right now is after I left LA, I went up to Alaska and I worked for the University of Alaska, and I developed curriculum, and I was going out to villages. And as I was going out to villages, I was getting to know people. And then a job in Nome, Alaska, which services all the villages that I was going out to, opened up with the Alaska Department of Fish and Game, which allowed me to then move out to Nome. I spent 3 years in Nome, which is, there's no roads that go to Nome. You have to fly in. It's pretty remote, although it's a bigger city than most of the villages in rural Alaska. So, but that allowed me to work with so many different tribal consortiums, working with the Park Service, the state of Alaska, all these different entities. And what I've recently started doing, so when I came back from Alaska, I decided to open my own business doing education consulting. And now currently I am developing curriculum for the American Indian Science and Engineering Society, who runs programs all over the United States for different tribal organizations and for schools with a high population of Indigenous students. So it's been really interesting to see how all of these things built off of each other. So I would say to someone who's trying to make these decisions, like, you just never know. If it's of interest to you and you feel like the Lord has sanctioned your decision, like, go ahead, then do it. And I do believe that, let's say I had gotten married at BYU and I still had these interests. Like I said, I think God is very creative. And I think in some way, many of my desires, or I guess the Lord says all of our righteous desires, right? But many of my interests, my desires would have been met, and probably in a different way. So I just don't think you can go wrong by pursuing interests, but understanding that whether you make a decision to pursue career or pursue marriage or pursue both, that's your decision. And if you keep the Lord in the decision process and move forward with what your interests are, he's going to bless you at some point with what those desires are. So for me, I don't feel like I ever avoided marriage or dating. I just feel like I was pursuing things and the Lord thought they were good things to pursue. And so for me, it's that desire of companionship and partnership and family that will come. For other people who have a family, it may be that their career aspirations, or we may not have the same opportunities at 45 as we do at 25, but I do think that the Lord can be creative and fulfilling and satisfying our soul. It just might look different.
And I love that. I love that. I feel like that should be the tagline for this conversation is that God is creative. And we need to give him the space to be creative in our lives. And he'll work with us too. Those of us who are a little less risk averse like myself, right? He'll work within the constraints that we have and the personality types that we have. He's this all-knowing individual. So I love that. I love that so much, Kari. Thank you.
You make good points on that for sure.
Yeah. So as we kind of wrap up, I was wondering, is there anything else, any advice or words of wisdom that you would leave with our women students to pursue whatever it is that they choose post-graduation?
I would say that the Lord cares specifically about you and your interests and your desires. And so keep him in the decision process. And I would also say, get as much experience as you can. Take on new experiences and just start experimenting with life because it's interesting what opens up for you. And like we said, I think that God is creative and will be there for whatever you desire. And if he desires something very specific for you, he'll let you know, and you'll be able to feel peace at that. But for the most part, I think he just allows us to move forward with our desires, and he will allow us to become who we need to become in a variety of paths, whatever that might be.
Well, thank you so much, Kari, for everything. I have been uplifted and just haven't been able to stop listening to, to you. And so thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you, Lindsay. It was very nice to talk to you. And I'm always happy to do so because I feel like I've had a very blessed life trajectory, and I'm happy to share that if it's something that someone else wants to listen to.